What's going on, guys? This is Imaginate, and today I'm going to show you how to make a snare from scratch using synthesis, sample layering, some processing, and a little bit of spatial effects at the end, just so that we can add a little bit of dimension and characteristic to our final sound. Before I get into it, I just want to talk a little bit about what a snare is and what it's made up of. So a snare is made up of three things. It's made up of a transient, a body, and a tail. The transient is the initial sound of the snare. It is the initial hit, the initial crack, whip, click, tick, whatever you want to call it. It's that sound. After that comes the body, which is a pretty self-explanatory definition. The body is made up of the low mid tone that really defines the snare. And then following that, we have the tail, and the tail is usually a type of noise that follows everything else just to complement what came before it and add a little bit of continuity too. In the electronic realm, a lot of noise samples are added to the end of the snare to replicate what an acoustic snare would give off when it is hit. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. So today I'm going to start creating our initial sound using Serum. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in a MIDI note. Let's work in F. Let's use F. Cool. So that's what we have now. Just a saw wave, the default patch in Serum. So we're going to go to oscillator A, and we're going to go to analog, basic shapes, and we're just going to load up a simple sine wave. The next thing we're going to do is turn down the random, and then after that we're going to turn down the level, and then after that we're going to go to our LFO1, and we're going to take this point right here and drag it all the way to the left. Following that, we're going to put another point about right there, and then we're also going to take this little point right here and drag it down just a bit. And this curve right here that I'm creating is what's going to define whether or not the snare is a quick snappy snare or if it's kind of a big tonal ringy kind of snare. I like things that are a little quick, so I like tighter snares, so I'm gonna go for that. So let's bring this down quite a bit, and then let's drop the LFO on the level. Following that, I'm gonna hit the trigger option here, and what this is gonna do is it's gonna allow us to play from this starting point on the LFO, so we don't have to have any weird starting points as we listen through. It'll just start right here at the beginning every time that we play through. So I'm gonna loop this up, play it back, and that's what we have. The nice tone part of the snare, just the good starting spot for this. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to oscillator B and start creating the transient. And for the transient, I'm going to go to digital, and I'm going to choose let's choose the distortion, or dist C2. I think that's distortion for the second octave of C. Not quite sure, but anyway, I found that it works really well. So let's play with it a little bit. So right away, not doing too much for us. So the first thing we need to do is do exactly what we did with oscillator A, and that is turn down the random, turn down the level, and then create an LFO for this sound, or this oscillator as well. The difference here with this oscillator and LFO combination is that we're going to take the LFO and drag it here, drag it all the way to the left like we did previously, but instead of doing something like this, we're going to do something like this. And we're going to make it really, really, really tight. And there's a transient. So that's really all we need for a transient, just a really quick little kind of harmonically rich sound, but just something that stands out enough to have presence. So following that, we're going to start creating some noise. And to do that, we're going to go to the noise oscillator, turn that on, go to analog, and then hit the white noise option. And then we're going to turn the level down again and create an LFO for this as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a third LFO and drag this to about right there. Create another curve. This time something that's a little bit more, I guess a little bit longer, nothing too crazy. And we're going to drop that on the level as well. And this is what we have. So we already have a good starting spot, or good basis for our snare. I'm just going to attenuate things a little bit. So effectively what I've done is just adjusted the noise a little bit so that it's a little bit more cohesive with how our body sounds, and also make room for the transient a little bit. Cool, so following that, I'm going to go to the effects. And in effects, I'm going to turn on, let's see, distortion a little bit. And just a little bit of distortion, maybe that much. Maybe a little too much, actually. Yeah, maybe something like that. Just kind of, I guess, leave it where it was. But just a little bit of saturation. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is go to the compressor, turn that on. We're going to bring down the threshold, to around like maybe right there. Leave the ratio where it's at. Attack all the way down. Release about right there. Turn this up. Turn the gain. Turn the threshold down some more. Yeah, maybe to right there. And just for the sake of experimentation, let's turn on multiband. Turn the gain down because I know this is going to be pretty crazy right away. Yeah, so that's kind of the difference here. With the multiband compression, we get a more aggressive kind of snare, whereas with the regular compression, it's a little bit more tame and minimal, I guess. But the multiband, of course, just brings out the frequencies more and squashes a little bit more than the regular compressor. Cool, so now we have a little bit more of a flattened snare, a little bit more aggressive. Our transient's a little bit clearer. And this is off to a good start. So let's go to our EQ now. And in the EQ, all I'm going to do is just create a peak. And I'm just going to put the peak somewhere around like 800 to 1000 hertz. And this is where a lot of the clappy textures lie. So yeah, you can hear it right away. Yeah, so right there is a pretty good spot. Cool, so now we're done in Serum, so let's bounce this. Let's mute that and we'll hide Serum because we do not need it anymore. And this is our snare so far. This is what it looks like. So here we have our transient, and then right here is all the body stuff, and then the noise, and fades out. And that's looking pretty good so far. And it sounds pretty cool, but it could use a little bit of texture. So let's shape this a little bit more. Let's go to our EQ, and this time I'm using FabFilter's Pro Q2, and I'm just gonna do a little bit of a cut. We don't really want the low frequencies over here. Maybe a little dip there, maybe boost here. Bring out the clap a little bit. Maybe a little bit of a cut at the nasty frequency area. Let's see, maybe. Yeah, so something like that. That's pretty good. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put on some distortion, and this is just Logic stock distortion. Really simple, and I'm just going to do a little bit, just like 1 dB, and then turn on the output because it's going to get pretty loud. Yeah, something like that's okay. All right, and now let's go to the compressor in Logic, and we're going to use the Studio VCA, and we're going to turn auto gain off. We're going to turn auto attack release off, and drop the attack down. The release we'll keep right there for now, and we'll play with it in a minute. We'll turn the threshold or the gain reduction down, ratio up to about 4:1. Turn the makeup gain up. I'm actually going to turn off the distortion. Cool. So now we're done with that. So let's bounce this in place. And that's what we have. Again, just a little bit of a difference, a little bit more tonal up here. Things are a little bit more flattened. And that's kind of what we want to work with. So now let's get to the layering. So let's throw on some claps. Here's some claps and some samples that I have from my sample library. Yeah, so these all sound pretty cool. So let's go ahead and use that one. Let's drop that in there and let's start adjusting. So the first thing we're going to do when we start layering these samples is we're going to add a little fade to this. Something like that. We'll add a little bit of a, well, not a little bit, bigger fade there, just to keep it more cohesive with the initial snare sound. Cool. Now the next thing we can do is we can adjust the pitch on this, turn the mix up all the way, go to the drums section, and let's mess with the pitch a little bit. I think right there is a pretty good spot. All right, so now let's start EQing this, and we're going to take out all the low frequency stuff, and then just leave some content where the clappy stuff lies, and some high stuff. Cool, so that sounds pretty neat, but I do want to add a little bit more, so let's throw on another clap. That one's kind of cool, so let's add that. And again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add a fade. Cool, so now it's just adding a little bit more texture to it. Here's without. Kind of cool. A little bit more aggressive, and I like that. So let's turn this down a little bit though, because we don't want overpowering the other clap. That's pretty good. Now let's do another fade. Yeah, so this clap is just adding a little bit more snappiness to it. And I like that. So let's go to the EQ again. Let's adjust this. Let's just do a little low cut, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Not bad. Now let's go to, let's maybe mess with the OTT a little bit. Depth pretty far down. Cool, so the OTT is not doing too much, but it is just bringing up the sound a little bit more. We can adjust the low in the the low frequency of this clap. So I think that sits pretty nicely. So this is a good point now where we can take these 3 samples, we can group them together, and we can start compressing them to fit a little bit better. So let's go back to our Studio VCA, turn auto gain off, all that stuff. Adjust this just a little bit. We are clipping a little bit, so let me turn this down. Well, almost clipping. Now what we can do is we can draw a region on the group, and then we will bounce in place. So there's our snare. We can mute all this, hide all this. Cool. And this is what we have. So let's take a look. We've got our transient, we've got our body and noise and all that stuff, and it sounds pretty good. So a cool thing you can do here too, and this is something that I've been doing pretty recently with my snares, is adding just a little bit of a foley texture or just a little something right before the snare just to give it a little bit more whippiness. I'm not sure if that's a word or not, but that's how I kind of picture it in my mind, is like, a whip cracking. So to do this, I'm going to pull a foley sample from a sample pack that I'll be putting out with Loop Masters on March 28th. But for now, let's take one of these foley samples. Let's do 34. I think this is a pretty good one. Yeah, I like that one. The reason being is that it's not as spiky and it has a little bit more crunch to it, and that's what we want. We want some crunch, and this is what it's going to sound like. That's kind of what we're going for. Just a little quick sound right before the snare, just to give it that whoosh kind of whipping sound. So let's maybe tighten it up a little bit. Maybe something like that. Yeah, I like that. That sounds cool. With that out of the way, we have our foley sample put together with our snare. We can bounce in place. And then we can mute these and hide them because we no longer need them. And that's our snare. So at this point, you can stop here and you can save this, render it, put it in your sample pack that you'll be building and selling on all the digital marketplaces in no time. Or we can add a little bit more to it. And one thing that I like doing a lot is adding Valhalla Room or Trash 2 to my snares. Valhalla Room is a little bit more conventional, as you're going to get more of a reverb kind of tail. But Trash 2 will add a really interesting kind of texture to your snare by using the convolve section. So I'm gonna audition both to you. So let's go to our snare, which we're on already, and let's create a send, bus 2, and let's create a reverb. So we're going to go to Valhalla Room, and let's turn down the decay on this. We're just going to leave it stock as is, maybe turn up the high cut just a little bit. And then I also like to EQ this too, because sometimes the lows still exist and I don't want those. And then this about right there. So, and let's put this right here. Let's play it back. Cool. So we can adjust this. I quite like that. Yeah, that's really cool. It's like an intimate kind of environment. Cool. So what I do now is I create a track, and then I take the pencil, draw in a region, bounce down that reverb, get rid of it, turn this off, and then I bounce them together. And we can get rid of that, and then we'll mute this because we're going to go back to that for the trash too. But yeah, this is what it is. Cool. So it just adds a little bit more space, and I just think makes it a little bit more interesting. So from there, you can render that out and save that as well. But for now, let's move on to trash 2. Load that up. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the trash function and go to the convolution reverb module. And the convolution reverb module here in trash 2 has so many different presets that just sound really awesome. But for now, I'm just going to mess with. Let's just go to devices. Why not? Let's see what we got here. And I've got the mix all the way up to wet already. So we'll hear how it sounds. Kind of cool, but if we turn down the mix, it is adding a little bit more. I don't like this preset very much, so let's do some more to it. Let's go through these a little bit. That one's kind of cool. And of course, we can also change the mic settings. We have a dynamic, condenser, and ribbon, all of which have different tonal characteristics, as they should. I'm not really liking these too much, so let's go to the mech animal. This is a really great folder to work with too, or work in. For that reason, it's so cool. Yeah, so I think the cat sounds really cool. So yeah, again, just a little cool way to add some extra texture, characteristic to your snares, make them different. Anyway, that pretty much wraps it up. One last thing, like I said, I will be putting out a sample pack with loop masters on March 28th. That's full of foley sounds, and these foley sounds were also processed into sound bites, some like glitchy effects and things. Made some impacts, made some creepy atmosphere, stuff like that, some loops. And then I also took the one-shots and I dropped them in Serum and created a few presets, some like leads, basses, effects, and whatnot based off those. If that sounds interesting to you, go check it out. I would really appreciate it. And if you pick it up, thank you in advance. And I hope you find some really great use out of it. But for now, let us know if there's anything that you guys want to see. I know there's so much we can cover, and I would love to cover whatever you guys are wanting to see. So yeah, drop a comment, ask a question, give us a suggestion, just reach out, and we'll get back to you. But for now, go forth in creating your own snares, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
If you're an aspiring music producer looking for that breakthrough moment to evolve your sound, check out our online mentorship network at Pyramind.com.